The sky above Leyte Gulf burns orange and red as Lieutenant Junior Grade Yukio Seki banks his Mitsubishi A6M0 into a shallow dive. It's October 25, 1944, and through the oil-streaked canopy of his aircraft, he can see the American escort carrier St. Lo cutting through the Philippine Sea below, a gray steel island surrounded by white wake. His hands are steady on the control column. There is no sweat on his palms, no tremor in his fingers. He has already said goodbye to his wife. He has already written his final letter. The 250-kilogram bomb strapped beneath his fuselage is armed and waiting. Seki is not attacking the carrier. He is the attack. At 10:53 a.m., his Zero slams into the flight deck at over 300 miles per hour. The explosion rips through the ship's thin armor and detonates the aviation fuel stores below. Within minutes, St. Lo is engulfed in flames. Within an hour, she will sink, the first major warship ever destroyed by a deliberate suicide attack. Seki and his 4 wingmen have just changed the nature of modern warfare. They are the Kamikaze, the divine wind, and they are only the beginning. This is not the story of why Japan lost the war. This is the story of what happens when a nation realizes it is losing and decides that death itself can become a weapon. By the autumn of 1944, Imperial Japan is drowning. The war that began with the stunning surprise attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941, the war that saw Japanese forces sweep across Southeast Asia, the Philippines, and the Pacific in a matter of months, has turned into a nightmare of attrition. The decisive naval victory Japan needed never came. Instead, the United States rebuilt its fleet, trained new pilots, and unleashed an industrial war machine that Japan cannot hope to match. The numbers are staggering. In 1944 alone, American shipyards produce more aircraft carriers than Japan built in the entire war. U.S. factories churn out 96,000 aircraft, while Japan struggles to produce 28,000, many of them obsolete designs flown by undertrained pilots. At the Battle of the Philippine Sea in June 1944, what American pilots mockingly call the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, Japan loses 600 aircraft and 3 carriers in a single day. The cream of Japanese naval aviation, already decimated at Midway 2 years earlier, is effectively annihilated. Vice Admiral Takijiro Onishi understands the mathematics of this war better than most. A brilliant, ruthless officer who helped plan the Pearl Harbor attack, Onishi arrives in the Philippines in October 1944 to take command of the 1st Air Fleet. What he finds horrifies him. His fleet consists of fewer than 100 operational aircraft. Most of his pilots have less than 100 hours of flight time, barely enough to take off and land, let alone engage in the complex aerial combat that defined the early war. Fuel is scarce, spare parts are non-existent, and in 2 weeks, the largest amphibious invasion force in history will land at Leyte Gulf. Onishi does the math. Conventional tactics, the tactics of skilled pilots in dogfights, of precision bombing, of tactical air superiority, require resources Japan no longer has. A typical bombing attack might require 20 aircraft to achieve a single hit on an enemy ship, and most of those aircraft wouldn't return. The loss rate is unsustainable. The training pipeline is broken, and there is no time. But one pilot, one plane, one bomb, diving directly into a target at full throttle has a near 100% chance of hitting something. On October 19, 1944, Onishi gathers his squadron commanders in a Spartan briefing room on Mabalacat Airfield in the Philippines. The meeting is tense. What he proposes is unprecedented in modern warfare. The situation is desperate, Onishi tells them, his voice calm and measured. Our conventional tactics are ineffective, but if we are willing to make the ultimate sacrifice, if our pilots crash dive their aircraft directly into enemy carriers, we can turn the tide. One plane, one ship. We need only volunteers. The room falls silent. This is not a kamikaze attack, not yet. This is the first kamikaze attack, the moment the concept is born. And the officers know exactly what Onishi is asking. He is asking them to organize suicide missions, to ask their men to die, not in combat where death is a risk, but as the objective, death as doctrine. Lieutenant Yukio Seki, the young pilot who will become the first kamikaze to sink an enemy ship, volunteers immediately. "You absolutely must let me do it." But in his diary, recovered after the war, Seki writes something more honest. "Japan's future is bleak if it is forced to kill one of its best pilots. I am not going on this mission for the Emperor or for the Empire. I'm going because I was ordered." The 1st Kamikaze Special Attack Corps, Shinpu Tokubetsu Kogeki Tai, is formed the next day. To understand why Japan turned to suicide warfare, you must understand that the decision was not just tactical, it was cultural, ideological, and psychological, a collision of ancient warrior codes, modern nationalism, and the existential terror of total defeat. Japan in 1944 is not a Western democracy at war. It is a militarized empire steeped in Bushido, the way of the warrior, a centuries-old code that glorifies death in service to one's lord, that treats surrender as the ultimate disgrace, and that elevates self-sacrifice to the highest moral virtue. The samurai of feudal Japan practiced ritualized suicide, seppuku, as a means of preserving honor. To die in battle was glorious. To survive defeat was shame. This is not mere propaganda. This is what Japanese soldiers are taught from childhood. In the 1930s and early 1940s, the Japanese military education system indoctrinates millions of young men with the idea that the individual exists only to serve the collective, the family, the emperor, the nation. The imperial rescript to soldiers and sailors, issued in 1882 and memorized by every recruit, states, "Duty is weightier than a mountain, while death is lighter than a feather." To die for the emperor is not a tragedy, it is the purpose of life. But this cultural conditioning alone does not explain the kamikaze. After all, every nation tells its soldiers to be brave. Every military culture valorizes courage and sacrifice. American soldiers are taught to throw themselves on grenades to save their comrades. Soviet soldiers are ordered into suicidal charges at Stalingrad. The Germans fight to the death in Berlin. But none of these nations systematically organize and celebrate suicide as a tactic. Japan does. The difference lies in the collapse of hope.
By late 1944, Japan's military leadership knows the war is lost. American submarines have strangled Japan's supply lines. Over 80% of the merchant fleet is at the bottom of the ocean. The home islands are within range of B-29 bombers. The Soviet Union, which has maintained a fragile neutrality, is preparing to invade Manchuria. There will be no negotiated peace. There will be no miracle weapon. There will be no divine intervention. And yet, surrender is unthinkable. The Japanese government and military elite understand that unconditional surrender means the end of the emperor system, war crimes trials, and the likely execution of Japan's leaders. For the militarists who have ruled Japan since the 1930s, surrender is not just defeat, it is annihilation of the social order itself. They will do anything to avoid it, including bleeding their own population white. This is the logic that produces the kamikaze. If we cannot win, we can make the cost of victory so horrific that the Americans will negotiate. We can turn our inevitable defeat into a strategic defeat for the enemy. We can make them pay in blood for every mile, every island, every ship. And if that requires the lives of our pilots, our soldiers, our civilians, so be it. It is a plan born of desperation, dressed in the language of honor. The kamikaze is not one tactic. It is an evolving system of suicide warfare that metastasizes across the Japanese military between October 1944 and August 1945. It begins with the aircraft. Lieutenant Seki's first attack uses the Mitsubishi A6M0, the iconic fighter that once dominated Pacific skies. But by 1944, the Zero is obsolete, outclassed by American Hellcats and Corsairs in speed, armor, and firepower. What the Zero does have is range, maneuverability, and availability. Loaded with a 250-kilogram bomb and topped off with fuel, it becomes a manned cruise missile. The pilot is the guidance system. As the kamikaze campaign expands, Japan throws everything into the air. Obsolete bombers, training aircraft, biplanes, anything that can fly and carry a bomb. The Yokosuka MXY-7 Oka, nicknamed Baka by the Americans, is designed specifically as a suicide weapon. A rocket-powered flying bomb with a ton of explosives in the nose and a tiny cockpit for a pilot. It is carried beneath a bomber, released within range of the target, and then accelerates to over 600 miles per hour in its final dive. There is no landing gear, no ejection seat, no possibility of return. The Oka is a coffin with wings. But the kamikaze are not limited to the air. The Japanese Navy develops the Kai-10, a manned torpedo. It is essentially a modified Type 93 long-lance torpedo with a tiny compartment for a pilot who steers the weapon into enemy ships. There is a hatch, theoretically, for escape. In practice, it almost never works. Kai-10 pilots ride their torpedoes to oblivion, often unable to see their targets until the final seconds before impact. The Army creates Fukuru, underwater kamikaze. Divers equipped with mines on poles, positioned on the seabed near invasion beaches, trained to thrust their explosives upward into the hulls of landing craft and detonate themselves along with the enemy. They practice in training pools, holding their breath, waiting in the dark. By the spring of 1945, Japan is preparing for Operation Ketsugo, the defense of the home islands. The plans are apocalyptic. Thousands of kamikaze aircraft, thousands of suicide boats packed with explosives, tens of thousands of suicide divers, millions of civilians armed with bamboo spears trained to charge American tanks. The entire nation will become a weapon. Every man, woman, and child a potential kamikaze. This is not hyperbole. This is official Japanese military doctrine in the summer of 1945.
American military planners, looking at the fanatical resistance at Iwo Jima and Okinawa, looking at the kamikaze attacks, the banzai charges, the refusal to surrender, project these trends forward to an invasion of Japan itself. The estimates are horrifying. 500,000 to 1 million American casualties, millions of Japanese military and civilian deaths, a campaign that could last into 1946 or beyond, with every city turned into a fortress, every civilian a combatant, every inch of ground soaked in blood. This is the context in which President Truman authorizes the use of atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The kamikaze do not cause the atomic bombings, but the mentality that produced the kamikaze, the willingness to sacrifice millions in a hopeless fight, convinces American leaders that only a shock of unprecedented magnitude will force Japan's surrender. In a grim irony, the kamikaze helped bring about the very destruction they were meant to prevent. It is easy, in the cold calculus of strategy and statistics, to forget that every kamikaze was a person. They were teenagers, many of them, boys barely out of school, conscripted into a war they did not start, trained to die for a cause that was already lost. Some were true believers, indoctrinated by years of propaganda, genuinely convinced that their deaths would save Japan. But many were not. Diaries and letters recovered after the war reveal a more complex picture. Some kamikaze write with pride and resolve. "I am going to crash into an enemy ship," writes 19-year-old ensign Ichizo Hayashi. "I will smile when I make the final plunge." But others write with anguish. "I do not want to die," writes 21-year-old Lieutenant Ryoji Uehara. "I cannot believe that Japan will win this war, but I have been ordered and I will obey." Many kamikaze pilots spend their last nights drinking, crying, raging against the commanders who are sending them to die. Some have to be forced into their cockpits by superior officers. At least one kamikaze pilot, Ensign Keiichi Kuwahara, lands his plane in the ocean short of the target and swims back to shore, refusing to die. He is arrested, court-martialed, and executed for cowardice. The pressure is immense. To volunteer for the kamikaze is to be a hero. To refuse is to be a traitor, not just to the military, but to your family, your village, your ancestors. Social pressure, shame, and the threat of reprisal force many young men into a decision they would never make freely. This is not honor, this is coercion wrapped in the language of sacrifice. And the tragedy is that it accomplishes nothing. By August 1945, over 3,800 kamikaze pilots have died.
Thousands more suicide attackers, kaiten crews, fukuryu divers, suicide boat operators have perished in training or in futile attacks. And Japan is still losing. The home islands are burning, the people are starving, the emperor is preparing to announce surrender. The Kamikaze did not save Japan. They simply added thousands more names to the list of the war's dead. To the Americans who fought them, the Kamikaze were both terrifying and incomprehensible. "We couldn't understand it," recalls Seaman James Fahey, who served aboard the light cruiser USS Montpelier. "How could a whole country convince its pilots to kill themselves? It was like fighting an enemy from another planet." American intelligence officers studied the phenomenon obsessively, trying to understand the psychology behind it. Was it brainwashing, religious fanaticism, cultural programming? The answer, they concluded, was all of the above and something darker. The Kamikaze were the product of a society that had lost its capacity to acknowledge reality, that preferred collective death to the humiliation of admitting defeat. But there was also, grudgingly, respect. "Those pilots had guts," said Admiral William Halsey, commander of the Third Fleet. "Misguided, sure, wasted in a bad cause, but guts? No question." American sailors began to see the Kamikaze not as fanatics, but as victims. Boys sent to die by old men safe in Tokyo. Young lives burned up in a futile attempt to stave off the inevitable. After the war, captured Japanese officers were interrogated about the Kamikaze strategy. Many admitted it was a mistake. "We sent our finest young men to die for nothing," said one unnamed staff officer in American custody. The Kamikaze did not change the outcome of the war. They only made the tragedy greater. Vice Admiral Takejiro Onishi, the man who conceived the Kamikaze, never saw the war's end. On August 16, 1945, one day after Japan's surrender, he committed seppuku in his office. He refused medical assistance and took over 15 hours to die, a painful and deliberate act of atonement. He left behind a final statement: "I wish to express my deep appreciation to the souls of the brave special attackers. They fought and died valiantly with faith in our ultimate victory. In death, I wish to atone for my part in the failure to achieve that victory, and I apologize to the souls of these dead flyers and their bereaved families." It was an apology that came too late. Why did Japan turn to suicide warfare? The answer is not simple, because the Kamikaze were not the product of a single decision or a single cause. They were the convergence of culture, strategy, desperation, and ideology, a perfect storm of factors that turned young men into guided missiles. They were born from a military tradition that glorified death and scorned surrender. They were enabled by a totalitarian system that could compel obedience through shame, honor, and force. They were rationalized by a strategic logic that valued symbolic resistance over realistic assessment. And they were sustained by leaders who refused to accept reality until the very end. But beneath all of that, the Kamikaze were the product of a nation that could not imagine losing, and when loss became inevitable, chose annihilation over adaptation. This is the ultimate lesson of the Kamikaze, that when a society loses the ability to acknowledge failure, to change course, to prioritize the lives of its people over the pride of its leaders, it becomes capable of monstrous things. The Kamikaze did not win the war. They did not save Japan. They did not even slow the American advance for long. What they did was kill thousands of young men, traumatize tens of thousands more, and add one more chapter to the long, dark history of what happens when desperation meets dogma. In the end, Lieutenant Yukio Seki, the first Kamikaze to sink an enemy ship, was right. Japan's future was bleak if it had to kill its best pilots. And by the time the war ended, Japan had killed thousands of them. For nothing.
Let their story be a reminder of the human cost of war and the dangers of blind obedience. If you found this story powerful, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more WW2 history and untold stories from the battlefield.